Thank y'all for coming to the show here in Owensboro. Hoping we can grow this show and make it a lot bigger. Marlene and them's done a really great job with it. We've got some great people in here. My name's Bobby Gentry, and I'm going to talk a little bit about your food of these fish, when to change baits, what kind of baits to use, how you make a determination what type of lure to use. The thing that I touched base on yesterday, and I really like to have some response from you guys and gals that's out here, if you got any questions. What I say is not set in stone. What I'm saying is the things that I do on a realistic day. What I have to do as an individual, what you guys have to do as an individual to go out and catch more fish. You got to make decisions on your lure, the type of lure you use, and it's a lot of really what that bass is looking for. I was telling the fellow at the Berkeley tank here, our conversation was about lures. Lures are just like, if you're a mechanic, whatever job or whatever career you do, your tackle box is your tool chest. That's going to determine what you need. If you need a 9/16 wrench, that's what you use. If your fish is suspended, you've got lures to fish for suspended fish with. If they're feeding on the bottom, you've got lures that get down on the bottom and fish them deep. You got various types of lures, that the DD22s, the crankbaits that get down there. So that was one of the things we touched base on yesterday. And the other thing is your line that you use. The diameter of your line is real important. I'm not up here to sell any bait. I'm not up here to push any kind of bait. Basically what I want to do is increase your odds to be able to do a little bit better when you go to a different body of water and fish a different body of water. Excuse me. One of the things that we have to learn as a bass fisherman is the food sources that's in the water that you're fishing. You know, to me, it's more important to find the food source than my job is to find a lure that's going to mimic whatever that them fish are feeding on at the time. If the fish are not there, you're not going to catch them. You've got to find the fish, locate your fish. Good way to locate the fish is locate the bait. So if I'm going to do a little bit of homework, if I'm going to go out and pre-fish mentally, and I'm going to go out and pre-fish and actually get a game plan together, I'm going to figure out what them bass eat in that body of water that you're in. I'm going to learn what them fish are doing. I'm going to find out the crawfish. Crawfish change various colors with water temperature and depth and throughout the moon phases. Do a little research, because not every lake's going to be the same, not the same time frame. It's going to be water temperature and depth oriented to whatever they're going to look like. Same way with your shad movement. Time of year. So I'll use these three things: speed, depth, and presentation. I always have done that. I've heard it my whole life ever since I started bass fishing. That is really a very important part of bass fishing. Speed, depth, and presentation is a big part of what you're going to do with your lure choices, how fast you're going to move that lure, what kind of equipment you're going to use to try to get your bait to do what you want it to do. First thing we usually do, if we've got electronics on our boat, decent electronics, we go out on the lake, we look at the water temperature, we look at the wind direction, we look at the water clarity, and we know kind of what the food sources are. You find out when the shad starts spawning, where the warmest waters where your shad's going to generally be in the wintertime. Right now on Dale Hollow Lakes, where I spend most of my time, they know. He's caught some pigs, both of them big fish on Dale Hollow. You know, people that fish Dale Hollow, you know the spots to go to, just some by memory. You know, we grew up as kids on Dale Hollow. You've got your fishing holes that you know that you're going to catch fish. But you start analyzing, why do I catch fish there? We take that for granted. If you fish a lake or you fish a pond or you fish a river and you've always caught fish in that spot, well, you're going to go back there. But if you're a tournament angler or you travel around the country and you fish different places, me and Mark's a pro tournament guy, professional angler. Our conversations yesterday were about things that them guys have to do to locate their food sources, their bait, whether they're fishing down in Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, Texas, wherever it may be. If you're fishing Kentucky Lake, Lake Barkley, You're fishing Dale Hollow. What controls your food source? And what are they eating? I said yesterday, and I found out last night, I would have caught a whole lot of anglers last night because we went over at Moonlight and eat barbecue. If I was going to fish for a fisherman that was in this show yesterday, I'm going to go over there and that's where I'm going to fish. Guess what? I run into this gentleman, the whole family, and I run into Mark and them over there. So that's how you do fish. If they've got a place that they go and feed, they're going to be in them general areas. So then as an angler, you got to make a decision. You got to figure out, well, what have I got in my tackle box that's going to get me to the depth that them fish are holding at, and what are they going to bite on? So, I mean, I just got a few things here I use. I've got jigs, I've got a swim bait body, I've got something that I can fish as a guide. I've got to have something that my clients that are with me that can actually control. If I've got someone that's a real avid fisherman that's really up to date on how to make the cast, where to put it, and how to position the lure, you can fine-tune techniques. But if you've got someone that's wanting to learn, and you try to ask, I want them to ask me questions. Well, why did you come here? Okay, the wind's blowing in on this point. I go by there with now electronics. I got side scan down imaging. I'll find schools of shad off the edge of a point. That's going to tell me that I'm going to need to have a lure that's going to, you'll see them fish, they usually sit down below that school of shad. Or they'll be on that point. When them shad come across that point, they're going to be at a certain depth range. So you can take a bottom bait like a jig, or you can take a swim bait and work at different depths, and that's really important. You want to be able to get that bait in that strike zone and hold that lure for a longer period of time. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Direct me in anything to say? Okay. The thing we do on Dale Hollow that's really, there's a few basics that works everywhere I've ever fished. They eat crawfish and they eat shad. They eat different sized crawfish and they eat different types of shad. But what smallmouth have a tendency to like is small profile. I catch some smallmouth on 10-inch paddle tail worms. Everybody said, you're not supposed to catch smallmouth on a 10-inch worm. If they're aggressive and they're feeding, they'll hit a 10-inch worm. But on a general rule, if I go to Dale Hollow, they can tell you, if you're going green fishing, that's what we call them on Dale Hollow. You got green fish, you got brown fish. Largemouth or spots are green, smallmouth are brown. If I'm strictly fishing for smallmouth bass, I use a small profile jig. I use a lot of hair jigs, but the rubber jigs, I use usually a small profile. And I fish a little deeper. I put them in a category in my seminar yesterday. You got a horizontal fish, you got a vertical fish. And the reason I put them in that category, largemouth with barometric pressure changes and weather conditions and wind direction, a lot of time when a front comes through, you usually catch bass really good right before a front. Well, how does a front affect the fish? Same way if we get an airplane. All y'all probably flew in your lifetime. When you take off your ears, you got to pop them. You go across the mountains, you got to pop your ears. Barometric pressure somewhat affects them fish in a similar way. So what a smallmouth will generally do is pull out, use the water column. If I've got a point that and that's why a lot of times there's something on that point that holds these bass on that point. There's a food source there. Your wind direction, maybe you've got an area that the wind always constantly blows in that bay or blows on that bank. That controls the flow of the plankton. When you get that plankton moving, that plankton goes to that bank, you got your shad follow your plankton up and feed on your plankton. Food comes to the fish. The water temperature is going to determine a lot where they're going to be located. That's why we got a temperature gauge on our boat. In the wintertime, like what's going on right now, we've had the strange weather the last couple of years I've seen. It's made it hard to really pattern these bass. It's a guessing game. I don't care how many years you fish on a lake or how well you know it, you're not always going to have that perfect good day. If somebody tells you that every day I go, I catch them all the time, you really don't do that all the time. You're consistent, and you usually catch a fish or two, but that's not your perfect day. You've got to find all the conditions right. And you've got to locate the fish, and the way to locate them is by that food source. They're going to eat. They're probably going to eat every day, but they're going to feed differently. When you go back to the horizontal and vertical fish, if I've got a point that I've always caught fish on that point, and I'm throwing up tight on the shoreline, they'll come up and feed sometimes, and they'll drop right back off. That could be for light. The Dale Hall is clear. When you got a lot of light penetration, they'll pull off in shadows. I look for mud lines. If I've got a clay bank, generally you've got crawfish on a clay bank. Because when that water temperature gets to that point between 55 and 58 degrees, you've got crawfish spawning. They can't spawn on a rock, they'll spawn in mud or in a dirt bottom. And that's generally close to rock, or that's where a transition is for me. Now every lake's different. I might call a transition mud to rock. You might have, I've had phone calls, well, you catching on natural rock? Well, a natural rock is probably the rock structure, but you can have man-made structures like ripraps and stuff like that. Crawfish will use that, and that's why I'm real specific. If you're coming to the lake and you're having a tournament, I'm saying I'm finding them on transitions, on the rock, and not a man-made structure, like riprap. Two different kinds. So be specific when you ask somebody what kind of structure you're catching your fish on. If they say natural rock, most of the guys on the pro side that I know, they're catching on transition natural rock and clay. So I know that it's where a break line comes down. Them crawfish are spawning in that mud. Soft crawls work their way. They got the rock for cover. They'll spawn where they got stumps. That's why wood cover. Sometimes they'll be holding on stumps. Crawfish spawn, they hang next to the stumps. So that's one way that you put together patterns. Is there any questions at this point? The top lures, if I'm fishing, yeah, go ahead. Sure. You take, like as far as specific baits, let me give you examples. Shad wraps, number 5s, number 7s. We was looking at some lures a while ago. 5s, number 7s. Okay, let's go back to my lesson 1, speed, depth, and presentation. You're going to your toolbox of 5, 7 shad wraps. The colder the water, the wider the wobble. It's a good little rhyme to remember. Them little baits right there is a real good super springtime bait, especially on Barron River Lake. He's grinning. He's done it before. You take a shad wrap and you catch them bass when the water's starting to warm up, their metabolism's picking up. That's when you would use that bait. It's got a little bit tighter wobble. You need to make a long cast. That's when we use like spinning gear. If you could throw it good on a bait caster, depends on your casting. Work your walls. Them fish coming up feeding on them shad to get up there. Them walls warm quicker. How many knows how shad spawns? Anybody tell me how shad spawns? Do they make beds? No. They don't. Shad spawns on rocks. How many times have you ever been on a lake at night and you've heard flipping, flopping, carrying on at nighttime? Water's getting up there about 58, 60 degrees. Guess what's taking place? Shad are spawning. Didn't know that for a long time. Shad are spawning. They bump into each other. They run into the shoreline. They're flipping. They're just dispersing eggs. The reason they do it on them rock walls, in spring coming up, you'll find them fish spawning on places that got high light penetration. If you'll notice the bluffs that you're fishing on your lakes, that you hear that flipping and popping, Write that down mentally or in a book somewhere, because that's where it gets the majority of the early light. That's when you use them type baits, is when them shad are up on there. You can catch them on them at any time. Now on deeper fish, ledge fishing, if you fish Kentucky Barkley, you know ledge fishing. There's different ways to fish ledges. You'll take a DD22 or a big crankbait. You'll work them baits off them ledges,